Welcome to my house. Welcome to the Structure Talk podcast, a production of Structure Tech Home Inspections. My name is Reuben Saltzman. I'm your host, alongside building science geek Tessa. We help home inspectors up their game through education, and we help homeowners to be better stewards of their houses. We've been keeping it real on this podcast since 2019, and we are also the #1 home inspection podcast in the world, according to my mom. Welcome back to the Structure Talk podcast. I'm Reuben Saltzman, your host, alongside Tessa Murray. Tessa, how's it going today?
Hey, it's going well, Reuben. I'm grateful that today it's above 5 degrees out. So
We've got
everybody outside.
Yeah, it's well above freezing outside here in Minnesota. It feels great.
Yeah.
I mean, I was out in a sweatshirt today, and that's all I needed.
For you, that's impressive.
I could tolerate this kind of winter all year long. That'd be just fine.
I know.
You know what? Before we bring on our guest, we're doing the series. We're interviewing home inspectors all over the country. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to our show sponsors, IEB, Inspector Empire Builder. They help home inspectors be better business owners, better leaders, better managers, and just run their companies a lot better. It's not the technical side. It's more on the business side and the people side. We've been longtime members of IEB, huge supporters, huge fans of them. If you want to learn more, please check out the link in our show notes. So today we're continuing on with our series, Regional Home Inspection Differences. And today we're going down to sunny Florida to interview Mark Cramer. And I was going to start to give an introduction to Mark Cramer. I was going to give a title, but he's got so many potential titles. I could be here for a half hour. Mark he's been on just about every committee you could think of. He's taught on just about every home inspection topic you could think of. Mark, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Good afternoon. Doing great. Great
Good.
to be here.
Glad to have you. Mark, if you would, can you just talk us through a little bit about your history? What did you do before you got into home inspections? What brought you into home inspections? And then what did your home inspection career look like?
Well, I started back in the late 80s. Prior to that, I was doing renovations. I was flipping houses before flipping was even a word. And we didn't do it quite as aggressively as people did today or do today. But, I'd buy a house. I was single. I'd live in it. I'd fix it up, sell it. The first house I bought was literally a shack. I paid $16,000 for it. And
wow.
I sold it a couple years later for $29,000. And I just kind of kept going. And then we had a bit of a real estate banking crisis back then, and the banks that up to that point were very happy to give me all the money I wanted. All of a sudden, just turned that spigot off. So one of my friends, real estate agent, said, "Well, why don't you do home inspections? We need good home inspectors." So, as a contractor, I had some experience. I had a lot of experience actually with a lot of different aspects of housing. So I started doing inspections, and just as though, the business was totally different back then. We had paper forms. We didn't have computers. We didn't have fax machines. We didn't have cell phones. We had payphones and, pager and a miserable answering service.
Yeah.
And paper maps.
Map books, yes. Finding the house was often a struggle.
Right, I bet.
But my kind of warped personality is that I really like to study things and learn about things and really get very, very focused on things. So I just started learning a lot about home inspections. I joined ASHI back then, and also FABI, the Florida Association of Building Inspectors, and along with a couple other guys, we founded a local FABI chapter in the Tampa Bay area, which turned into an ASHI chapter. And then I later on got involved in ASHI a little more seriously on the national level. And I was, as you said, I served on a lot of committees. I was on the standards committee for more than 15 years.
Wow.
Through
Wow.
two different versions of the standards that we revised. And I became secretary after being on the board. I became secretary, vice president, president-elect, president, and past president. And now I'm pretty much a has-been. So I've been, doing inspections full time. Just one-man band. Never had any employees. I was really too lazy to have employees. So, that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
A lot of work. Yeah. A lot of liability too.
Mm.
So, and that was by choice. I mean,
Sure.
that was by choice. And I taught home inspection for, it was Inspection Training Associates at that time, ITA, back in the 90s. And I taught in the classroom for 10 years for ITA. Later, they sold that to Kaplan and then became the ASHI school after that. And I enjoyed doing that, but that's pretty hard work, teaching every day. So,
Yeah.
And it doesn't pay very well either. I enjoy doing it, but does not pay nearly as well as doing home inspections. So I've kind of migrated away from that. And I've done a lot of training on the local, state, and national level at seminars all over the country for different chapters. And at the ASHI conference, I've done a whole bunch of sessions there on all different topics.
And I got to say, Mark is a fantastic teacher. And that's how I know Mark, is from sitting in on sessions that he has taught. And, I've said it many times. You go to these conferences and sometimes it's like, oh, this sounds like a really fascinating topic. Then you look who's teaching, you go, nah, I don't think I'm going to that one. Other times you look at topics, you go, it looks kind of boring. And you see, oh, wait, Mark Cramer's teaching. Oh, I don't care if it sounds like a boring topic. I'm going to go to his class because he knows what he's talking about and he'll make it interesting. So Mark is a fantastic teacher.
Well, it's kind of you to say. But try and make it interesting, because if it's interesting for everybody else, it's interesting for me. And the great thing about teaching is you learn a lot. I mean, you have to learn a lot in order to teach people. I mean, I've taught, electrical inspection to electricians in the classroom, and I've taught, air conditioning inspection to air conditioning contractors in the classroom. So you have to know your stuff. You really have to continue to learn in order to be a good teacher.
Yes.
Oh, man. Yes. Yeah, I would say doing the training at Structure Tech helped me become a better inspector, because I had to relearn all the information we were supposed to know and know it like the back of my hand. So I felt like I learned new things too that I probably should have learned in training. Sorry, Reuben. But I picked them up when I was putting all of the training materials together.
Hey, can I just take a quick side note about that? Right now, we've got 2 home inspectors in training. And, for a while, Tessa was our hiring and training manager. She did all the hiring, all the training. She put together all the curriculum that would kind of replace what a home inspection school would do. We did all of that in-house, training all the inspectors. And it would be basically 8+ days of classroom training where it was, intense. And Tessa created the curriculum. And now with these 2 new inspectors coming on, I've been doing it because I don't have Tessa to do it anymore. And my mind is just blown at how much content you had put together. I mean, each one of these slide decks is about 500 slides, and there is just so much to cover. And I look over and I'm like, my goodness, this is solid content. I should sell this for $1 million. It's what you put together is solid gold, Tessa. It's very good.
Well, thanks, Reuben. You know what? I just put together everything that you were trying to teach each home inspector, and it was gathering all of the resources and just putting them together in a cohesive way and trying to teach them in a way that made sense, and in order that made sense. So it was drawing from the classes that you've put together, that you teach on a regular basis, all the blogs that you've written, teachings from other inspectors or other people that are in the industry that we respect, from building scientists. And it was, you know what, that was super fun. I don't know, Mark, if you enjoyed this part about teaching too, but part of the joy for me is like figuring out, how do we take all of this information and how do we boil it down and make it digestible? And I don't know, with our structure tech curriculum, like you said, Reuben, I tried to boil it down, but still I mean, when you're talking about electrical and inspections, there's just so much to know. And
So much.
every subject, every area of the house, there's just so much to know. You don't realize how much you have in your head when you're a home inspector and you're going through the house. It's almost like breathing when you've been doing it for a while. But when you're new starting out, it's like drinking
you're
from a fire
drowning.
hydrant. Yeah. And so, seeing
Yeah.
all this information get put together in the slides, like I said, I mean, for me, it was humbling. But then also kind of just like taking a moment to take a step back and like, wow, I know this and you know this, and we want other people joining our team to know the same stuff too. So it's one of those things where you just always are learning. You have to keep learning too.
Yes.
So that's a challenge.
Things change tremendously, and that was a struggle I always had teaching. Is there's just so much information and so limited time to try and force feed that information into their little brain. And I would tell people on the first day, look, when you leave here, you're going to know what you don't know. And
yes, that's it. That's exactly right.
I can't make you a home inspector in 1 or 2 weeks, which is the time that we had. We had 7-day classes and 14-day classes. Can't make you a really good home inspector in that time, but I can teach you the basics, and I can teach you what you don't know so that you can continue to learn and understand that learning is a never-ending process. It just as long as you're in the business. And when I started, the one big difference between then and today is the amount of information available that you were expected to know. I mean, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have when I started teaching, we did not have a good internet connection in the classroom. And even if we did, you couldn't go on the web and find 1/100th of the information you can find today on any particular topic.
No.
So even your customers can, unfortunately, get on the internet and learn a lot of stuff, half of which is incorrect. But you got to keep up, and you have to stay ahead of them, and you have to be able to convey that information. So, and the other difference is, buildings, the way we build houses changes, and the materials change. I mean, we didn't have, PEX piping. We didn't have high efficiency furnaces. We didn't have high efficiency AC systems. We didn't have 5 different kinds of siding that are common today back then. So these are all things that come along that you have to digest and learn about to stay ahead of the game, or to just even stay even.
Right.
And it's difficult for home inspectors out there, especially if they're learning challenged, like a lot of people are. They don't really like to spend the time to learn those things. So hard to keep up. It's amazing, as you said, Tess, it's amazing the amount of stuff you have to know, that you have to have in your head every day to be a really good home inspector.
Until you start trying to write it all out, you don't realize it.
Yeah.
It is. But it's interesting that you say you've seen things change over the years, just in terms of the materials that are used, the sidings that you see, and you just have to stay up with the times to be able to be a competent, good inspector and know what you're looking at and know what it should be and shouldn't be. And it's one of those things that I think for the people that get into home inspection today, you have to realize that things are changing and they are only going to continue to change even faster with technology and
Yes.
AI. There's not only learning how a house is built, how the materials have changed and how they perform differently, but there's like the whole, you know, tech business side of this as well. I feel like that's changing. And you said, Mark, you just decided to be a lone wolf. And I respect that, because I think if you want to be a business owner in this day and age, like it's a whole other animal to learn how to run a business and how to stay up to date with all the technology that's changing so quickly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So true. So true.
That's why you love IAB, right, Reuben? And then why you talk about it every podcast.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good resources. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I usually we ask our different experts from around the country specific questions about kind of their housing stock that they deal with and what they see and what the houses are like and some typical challenges. Can you give us kind of an overview of the types of houses that you see in Tampa? Like, how are they constructed? I'm guessing they don't have basements, but what are the types of materials you see, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you run into in your area?
So we have a variety of housing stock going back to the late 1800s. And of course, at that time frame, they're mostly wood frame, crawl spaces. There are a couple basements in Tampa. I've been in a couple of them, but
Really?
very rare.
Huh.
So that takes you up to about the 1940s. Wood frame crawl spaces, 1-story, 2-story, bungalow style, sort of, or craftsman style. And then you start to see concrete block, slab on grade houses. Mostly 1-story, truss framing typically, and that takes you up to about the late 1980s, where, as a result of the increasing cost of land, builders started building 2-story houses instead of 1-story houses. And those are mostly block on the first floor, wood frame on the second floor. And predominant siding is, going back to the 1900s era, early 1900s, wood siding, or asbestos single siding.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we went to that, some stucco on wood frame. And then when we went to the 50s, 60s, the 1-story block houses were either painted block or stucco on block, or a combination of both. Maybe they put some stucco on the front and painted the sides. And then after 1960s, it would have been all stucco on block. The 2-story houses were mostly stucco, block on the first floor, stucco on the second floor, which have led to some interesting water intrusion problems, to the point of catastrophic failures of that type of housing for a long period of time.
Now, let me ask you: are you finding problems with the stucco on the block? Is that where it goes wrong?
No.
Okay.
Stucco on block is absolutely the best structure siding combination for this climate. It's pretty much bulletproof.
Okay.
It's really hard to mess it up, although I have seen it done, but 99.99999% of the time it's going to be perfectly fine. You don't really even need to spend a lot of time looking at it. You just walk around the house and you're pretty much done looking at the stucco.
Okay.
The problem is with stucco on wood frame, where water and
That's kind of what I thought you'd say, but I wanted to make sure, because I don't inspect any stucco on block here in Minnesota.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like EIFS, only it's a different material, but same sort of water intrusion problems and structural damage problems.
Hmm. It sounds like, Mark, you've got this variety of housing stock there. Hearing about some of this original, like wood framed, the bungalow styles that, had a crawl space underneath them that are, pretty old to like early 1900s, you said,
Yeah,
even?
correct.
Okay. Yeah, all the way to like slab on grade homes and then back to two-story. And I would imagine that you've seen enough of these homes now doing, inspections for the last, 30 plus years that you just you see when the house was built and what style it was, and you kind of have an idea in your head of what things to look for, where you're going to see the problems. Is that true? Is that,
Absolutely, absolutely. I can look at the real estate listing and pretty much predict what kind of problems we're going to find with that house, or what we're,
can
not
you give us
surprised to find.
can you give us a highlight reel, Mark?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
you're
What's the
thinking
most
as you're
common
going
stuff
through
you
these
see
different.
pictures of and you just
Yeah.
go, ooh, that's juicy. I know what I'm going to see there.
Well,
Yes.
if I see it's an older house with a crawl space, the first thing I'm looking at is how many steps are going up to the front porch. That tells me how high off the ground that crawl space is.
Yep.
Tells me
Yeah.
whether I
Okay.
even want to take the job or not. And today I turned down most of those.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay. I would do, to be honest.
I'm too old to be crawling through crawl spaces. So I'll do it if there's enough room, but I'm not crawling through a 18-inch crawl space. So that's the
Man,
first thing I look at.
you guys have spiders and snakes down there that'll kill you. So no thanks.
Yeah. That's not really the nastiest thing in a crawl space. So, and then with that era house, I know there's going to be termite damage. It's just a question of how much.
Okay.
And I know that
Okay.
if they've had subterranean termites, there's going to be visible damage in the crawl space, and that's something you're going to focus on. And um, we know that the foundations were woefully inadequate in most homes of that era, so there's going to be settling problems going on. Brick piers that are deteriorated because the mortar we had was just a lime mortar. That there's used to be, not so much anymore. It's all gone, but there's probably some knob and tube wiring under there, and that there's going to be cast iron drain lines under there that are going to be deteriorated, and there's going to be galvanized water piping underneath there that's end of life also.
Yep.
Okay.
So those are all things that are, you're kind of focused on.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So structural issues, termite issues, and then just the old system stuff, old electrical,
Right.
old plumbing.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we don't have too much old electrical or plumbing left because of the insurance situation here. We've been doing insurance inspections for a long time here, and you can't get an insurance policy with knob and tube wiring in Florida. You can't get insurance with old galvanized piping.
Wow.
Difficult with old cast iron piping also. We don't see any knob and tube anymore. It's all been replaced. We don't see any fuses anymore. They've all been replaced. We very rarely see like an FPE panel because they've all been replaced.
Sure.
But those were all, issues.
Okay.
But the insurance side of that has sort of cleaned most of those up.
Okay.
Okay. You're a few decades ahead of us. I think that's coming where we are over the people we've talked with, and hearing about the rest of the country is that, just the whole insurance game is really impacting, the housing market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't know how bad it's going to be, and you guys don't. And I listened to another podcast you did, I think, with John Bolton.
Oh, yeah.
Who I know about insurance inspections.
Yep.
But what you didn't touch on there is what really happens as those start to become more common, and how that whole system is basically based on fraud and deceit, and how it puts the home inspectors in a really, really bad place.
Tell me more.
So I'll give you a typical scenario. So you're familiar with 4-point inspections.
Yep.
if we go out and do a home inspection, well, I'm going to spend 3-4 hours there. I'm going to find every little thing wrong with the roof, electrical, plumbing, heating, and cooling systems, and then I got to do a 4-point report, separate form. I got to put every defect on there that I have discovered. Then the seller has to fix those things because the buyer can't get insurance until that form is cleared. You cannot submit that form to the insurance company with any defects on it. They'll just kick it back and say, fix all these things, get another inspection at your expense, of course. So now the seller, who doesn't really care that much because they're selling the house, they're tasked with fixing these things, and they procrastinate. They hire the cheapest people they can find, if they can even find them. And this is all very time sensitive. As you know, this whole real estate transaction is very time sensitive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So they get to the last week and they're fixing these things, and then we've got to go do another inspection, which the buyer doesn't really want to pay for, and we go out there and half of the things are done, half of them are not done, or some of them that are done are not done correctly. So now it's one day before the closing, and the inspector all of a sudden is the bad guy who's holding up everybody's commission and the whole transaction. The buyer's mad, the seller's mad, the real estate agents are mad. Everybody's mad at you.
Yes.
Then the flip side of that is that there are some people who will do insurance inspections and that ride past on a galloping horse with their seeing eye dog and their white cane and spend 15 minutes, and they will never find anything wrong. And, well, why can't I do that as a home inspector?
Yeah.
So
Oh boy.
and there's so much, fraud that goes on, and everybody knows this. The real estate agents know it. The insurance agents know it. But unfortunately, there are plenty of inspectors out there, and a lot of them just do insurance inspections. They don't do home inspections because they don't have the business. But there are a lot of inspectors out there that will, give you a clean report. So it's to the point where I won't even do 4-point inspections anymore. It's just too much grief and aggravation. And I tell people, look, you really don't want me doing your home inspection or your insurance inspection.
Because you're not going to pass.
Because it's not going to pass, and it's going to cause all kinds of grief. Just ask your insurance agent for the name of somebody that'll, can do an insurance inspection for you.
Someone who specializes in giving you a clean 4-point inspection report, right?
Right. You want a white cane inspection.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. What do you think the industry is going to look like in another 5 or 10 years? Do you think a lot of the people that are out there doing a really thorough inspection and they're extremely ethical, do you think they're going to die out because they won't be able to get any business, and the only industry that will survive for home inspection is going to be basically employees of the insurance company that are kind of flying by and checking some boxes?
No. I look. The good real estate agents out there that would refer people like me, they're going to want good inspections because they realize that it's to their benefit. It's protection for them, along with their buyers. So,
okay.
There's always going to be a demand for that, regardless of, what happens with the insurance industry.
Sure.
That's good to hear. That's good. You just got to find, as a home buyer, you have to be savvy, and you have to have a good real estate agent who's ethical, and they know what they don't know, and that they have a good ethical home inspector as well.
Yeah, and that's a whole other can of worms. You don't really want to open.
I'm sure you see a lot of things that are pretty deflating and frustrating in Florida.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a little different because of the insurance problem, but it's the same story everywhere. I mean, everybody I talk to all over the country, same issues.
Sure.
Yeah.
Same conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So take us back through. It was really interesting hearing your, the kind of the highlights for the things that would be the typical problems in the house that's like a early 1900s wood framed, crawl space. What about some of these other houses that you see that are built later, like slab on grade, both wood framed and concrete block, and then the 2-story houses?
Well, the later slab on grade block houses from the 60s, 70s era, those are at the age where they're 50, 60 years old, so a lot of the original systems are at the point of failure, be it piping under the slab or windows, things like that. And the longer the house sits there, the more opportunity there is for Joe homeowner to come along and do things incorrectly. So they tend to have a lot of just wide variety of problems over various systems. If I go look at I did the day before yesterday, a 1-year-old slab on grade house. With that house, really not a whole lot of problems. Just sometimes we'll find, a common issue we find in newer houses is, insulation in the attic that's not as thick as it should be. Some roofing materials that are installed incorrectly. Electrical systems are generally pretty trouble-free because the electrical code's pretty strong, and those do get inspected fairly well compared to some other systems. Poorly installed tile on the floor sometimes, and sometimes in tubs and showers, things like that.
Yeah.
But generally not major issues. Then the 2-story wood frame, for a period of time, early 2000s to 2010, 12, we had just some really poorly installed stucco applications where there wasn't adequate drainage, there were the intersection of the stucco and penetrating elements was not sealed properly, no caulk joints like there should be, and that led to water intrusion problems, and in some cases, pretty severe structural damage.
Yeah.
So I made a living for a few years just doing destructive stucco inspections for
really?
construction defect claims against builders.
And what did that look like when you were doing those? What was your process?
So, visually looking at the stucco, determining how thick it is, documenting all the things that are missing that should be there, and then cutting holes in the stucco to uncover concealed damage to the underlying wood structure.
Okay, so you weren't doing pin probe testing.
No, you can't. In hard coat stucco, that doesn't work.
How come?
Well, I take that back. I have done some of that, but you have to drill a hole through the stucco to the wood and then stick your probes in there in the wood.
Yeah. Yeah, we do a ton of that here in Minnesota. But you never got into that so much. Yours was just cutting bigger holes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I suppose those weren't so much for real estate transactions then, were they?
No, they were construction defect claims.
Got it. Okay.
The law here puts the builders on the hook for 10 years for construction defects.
Sure.
Yeah. Obviously, they don't tell you that. They tell you have a 1-year warranty, but by law, you have a 10-year warranty.
Yeah, we got the same thing here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you ever, do you have people in your area who would do pin probe testing for real estate transactions?
No.
Okay.
No seller would let you do that.
Okay.
Really?
Got it.
They don't want to know. The insurance company would say, you got to fix that. And then what do they do?
Right. The ones I've done have been for relocation companies.
Okay. Sure.
That require it. So in that case, the seller doesn't really have any choice. So.
Yep. Okay. All right. Interesting.
So are there certain types of houses that you just would not buy if you were telling a grandchild or a kid to, they're looking for a house in Tampa, would you say steer clear of these 1990s 2-story stucco homes?
Yeah, absolutely. absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless they're, today we're doing a little better. Recently in the past few years, we're definitely doing better because, builders have paid out tens of millions of dollars
Mm,
repairing these houses. So obviously they've tried to improve the construction process. Um, but depending on the era and the condition, yeah, I might tell you to walk away from that kind of house just based on past experience. Uh, I would not advise you to buy a older wood frame crawl space house either.
okay.
Mhm.
They're basically just, a lot of structural issues and mold delivery
Okay.
systems.
Yeah,
Uh,
mold delivery systems.
yeah.
Is that because you see a ton of mold in the crawl space and the crawl space is really connected to the house and so it's just mixing, all the air is mixing?
Well, uh, yeah, the crawl spaces, and you never go into a crawl space and come out and say, "Gee, it looked great in there." You know,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's a lot of mold growing in crawl spaces. There's a lot of mold here everywhere. This is a hot, humid climate,
Yeah.
so it's a constant battle. Uh, but those houses have um, small penetrations and sometimes large penetrations in the floor system between the crawl space and the living space. Holes
Okay.
around piping, holes around wiring, holes underneath the bathtub, um, that all allow the passage of air from the crawl space into the house. And then when you
Yeah.
heat up the attic, and the hot air is rising in the attic, it pulls air out of the house, which then pulls more air out of the crawl space. So you
Yeah.
get that chimney effect. So you are constantly um, breathing crawl space air in those houses.
Sure.
Yeah.
And people in North Carolina have done some studies on this, and houses with crawl spaces uh, tend to have much higher levels of mold inside the house based on testing than non-crawl space houses.
I believe it.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
me too.
absolutely.
Yeah, that is a problem. And I appreciate you talking about that because that's, in my mind, that's something that, if you're an inspector down there, you should be thinking about that, aware of that, so you can educate your clients on that, hopefully, if they don't already know. But that's all about, that's building science. It's understanding how the house works as a system. And if you've got, air conditioning running and it's hot outside and cold inside, that warm air wants to move from hot to cold and it's being pulled in through all those little gaps and holes in the building envelope, those little holes in the floors. And then when it gets inside, that warm, moist air condenses on cold surfaces, and then you get condensation and mold. And all these things affect indoor air quality and people's health. And they don't think about that. But who wants to be breathing in swampy crawl space air? It doesn't matter what kind of MERV filter you have if you've got these little holes that are allowing, this air movement to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen so many mold and air quality problems caused by those holes, and also caused by poorly installed air conditioning systems. Because
Mm.
our primary uh, heating and cooling here is air conditioning.
Mhm.
We even this time of year, we go from air conditioning one day, we turn on the heat the next day, and then we turn the air conditioning on the next day.
Sure.
So, but we're mostly air conditioning. So
And
and if you set that air conditioner down in that old crawl space house in a closet with no return ductwork, which is very common, because these houses didn't have air conditioning to begin with,
Yeah.
then you are pretty much sucking air right out of the crawl space into that air conditioning system and
no.
distributing
Yuck.
it throughout the
Oh,
house.
gross. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of my question. I wanted to ask what does an improperly installed air conditioning system look like? So you definitely talked about something that's just nasty. I don't see that stuff like that here in Minnesota. What else goes wrong with your AC systems?
Uh, Pressure imbalances between the supply and the return. If you have leaking ductwork in your attic, um, so if we think of the house living space as a box, and we have ductwork outside of that box and it's leaking, well, that return system is trying to suck in, 1,500 cubic feet per minute, and it's pumping out 1,500 cubic feet per minute, but 200 cubic feet of that pumping out is leaking into the attic air, then it's still going to pump in 1,500 cubic feet, but that extra 200 cubic feet is going to come from somewhere else because you've depressurized the house now.
Sure.
So it's going to come in through little gaps and cracks, well, regardless of whether it's a crawl space house or not. It's coming in from outside.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Are
That makes
you
sense.
measuring? Are you measuring supplies and returns and that sort of thing when you're inspecting these systems? How do you know if you've got leaks on the supply side or leaks on the return side, or how do you identify that being an issue?
It's tough to identify. Sometimes I will kind of demonstrate that using a smoke pencil and opening the door just a little crack, and if we can see that smoke's getting sucked in from the outside, then the house is under negative pressure. Or I'll use the other scientific method is, you lift one finger and you hold it up next to the crack and see if air is leaking in.
Sure.
So you can detect pretty low airflow doing that. So when I suspect that, that's something that I'll do. But
Okay.
I'm not measuring airflow because I don't know what the airflow should be. So there's no point in measuring.
That's
you talk about this. I'll share one of my. Oh, go ahead.
And that's way beyond the scope of what we can do as home inspectors and the limited time we have there.
Yeah. We see a lot of imbalance in Minnesota homes, and usually it's the basement that ends up sucking air, and then the upper levels get pressurized. And what I'll frequently do is I'll take the door to the basement and I'll just close it so it's about an inch away from being closed, and you let it go, and then conk, and then it shuts by itself. Right. And you turn off the HVAC system, you close it about an inch, and it just sits there. It's like, all right, here's a great visual evidence right here. Your basement is sucking a ton. You got a very imbalanced system.
Yeah, and there's no mold in basements.
They're not as bad as crawl space. I mean, at least our basements are thought of as part of the box.
Right.
We can see the basement. For crawl spaces, people usually don't get underneath there, do they?
No, never.
Out of sight, out of mind. Yeah.
Although I have had clients crawl in there with me.
Have you?
Yeah.
Really?
I've had women clients crawl in there with me.
I'd if I'm hiring you, I'd be like, dude, I'm paying you to do this, Mark. No thanks. I don't need to come in there with you. I trust you. You tell me what you see. I'm paying you good money to do this.
Well, your customers vary. Some of them are very interested in what's going on. Others can't change a light bulb, and
Yeah.
So I had a guy call me yesterday. He said, I've got this mole on the ceiling in my bathroom around this vent, and he sent me a picture of it and wanted me to come look at it. And I said, well, look, dude, this is just there's a gap around that vent, and hot, humid air from your attic is coming in around that vent. It was one of those light vent fixtures, and it's condensing on that ceiling. Is the water vapor is condensing as moisture, and there's dust there that has particles in it that are food for mold, and there's mold spores everywhere, and you're getting some mold growing on there. All you need to do is just clean that off, seal around that vent, and he's not capable of doing that. He said, well, I'm the least handy person you'll ever meet. If my wife heard you say that, she'd say, no, do not do that. You'll mess it up somehow. So,
all through the ceiling. Yeah.
Some people can fix things. Some people can't fix anything.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, we have the same problem, but the opposite, Mark, where we have, if a bath fan is in a ceiling and there's air leakage around it, we've got warm, humid air in the bathroom that's leaking up through that penetration in the ceiling.
Right.
And then all that moisture is condensing on the underside of the roof deck that's really cold in the wintertime. And then you get frost in the attic and all sorts of problems with that.
So that's a big difference here. Here we're required. It's same code. We're required to vent that bathroom to the exterior, but when you don't, nothing bad happens in this climate. I mean, it's
you're
more,
venting cold air into the or cooler air, I
it's
guess,
more
into
humid,
the attic.
in the attic than it is in the house typically.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not really a big deal here.
Yeah, your attics are a little more forgiving than ours.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a lot of houses these days where they are moving that insulation up to the underside of the roof deck to bring that ductwork and air handler into the conditioned living space? They're making it.
A lot of higher-end custom houses we're seeing spray foam insulation,
Okay.
which is a whole nother problematic issue.
You see a lot of issues with the installation of it, improper installation, improper mixing, or say more about that.
90% that I checked are not thick enough. And I've got a knife. It's actually a duck knife that I've marked off 3, 4, 5 inches on, and I just poke that through the insulation so I can take a picture and show how thin it is. Those typically have to be 5.5 inches around that to get to R19, which is as thick as you can spray that foam. And then the second problem that we see is humidity control. If you don't get a really good feel around the perimeter, then you are allowing humid air from the outside to come in there, and you are creating a nice mold farm in there. In spray foam attics, the temperature typically is going to be in the summer here where it's 85, 90 degrees outside. We're going to air condition to 75 degrees or so, and it's going to be 85 in the attic, but the humidity should be exactly the same as the humidity in the house. When it's not, then, and this is really common, then you're going to have mold issues. Now, there are some people that will say that you have to dehumidify every one of those attics. But most of them that we've ended up testing, we can find air leakage and fix that air leakage and get the humidity under control. But it's another interesting building science problem.
Yeah. As we make houses that are a lot more airtight and better insulated, especially near climate zone, dehumidification, like you said, is going to be is a problem already and will become more of a problem, I think. So are you seeing a lot of whole house dehumidification systems installed like on the air handler or tied into the ductwork somehow in the newer construction houses?
Almost never.
Really?
Because your air conditioner is a great dehumidifier. And when we're air conditioning, we don't have humidity control problems.
Okay.
We have more mold problems here in the wintertime than we do in the summertime because we're not air conditioning, so we're not dehumidifying. But the humidity outside is still pretty high here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, if you're running your AC all the time, then it's, in theory, if it's working properly, sized correctly, it's going to be dehumidifying. But as our houses become better insulated and a lot more airtight, and they're way more energy efficient, so you don't have to run the AC as long to cool it down. You don't have the air leakage happening through the building envelope that's allowing that warm humid air to come in. Then you won't have to run the AC as much, and then you still have all the internal loads for humidity. And so at some point, I would think houses, as we make them more energy efficient, more airtight, would need some sort of serious dehumidification system installed in them, especially in Tampa.
No, because you're putting in a smaller air conditioning system. So,
Yeah.
and you have to size that system not only for the sensible load, but also for the latent load, which is humidity. So you have to size that system to handle that latent heat in addition to the sensible heat. So, we're putting systems in houses today that are almost half of the size that they would have been, 10 years ago.
Okay.
So they still run, enough to control the humidity.
Okay.
Okay. That's good.
Well,
So
that's good to hear.
that's all part of the design process.
Yeah.
We're designing for 75 degrees, 50% humidity at a 92-degree outdoor temperature here.
Yeah.
And then we've got more variable speed systems today, which also help with that issue.
Yeah. Wow.
The other place where I do see humidity control problems are mini splits.
Say more about that. Because we're starting to see more mini splits up here in Minnesota, and especially in older homes that don't have ductwork and they just have
Right.
like a boiler for heat.
Right.
They want air conditioning. They're installing more and more mini splits.
So many cases, those end up being oversized. And the AC guy thinks that, well, these are variable speed, so that'll handle that humidity problem. But it doesn't. And so we end up with really high humidity and mold problems with some of those systems. I mean, they can work fine, but it's just something you got to keep an eye on.
Sure.
And you're probably educating the home buyer too. Just let them know you've got this mini split and it's likely oversized, or is that part of the inspection process? Do you look at the size of a mini split and look at the age and the construction of the house and say, I think this might be too big and this could lead to comfort issues and humidity problems?
Yeah, and absolutely.
Okay.
And those mostly get retrofitted into older houses, so
Yeah.
we've got a good idea of how much capacity you need for that size house, that type of construction of that era. Where it gets more difficult is actually today in these newer houses, I can't really tell you what size AC system you need there because we're putting so much more insulation in. We're putting much better windows in. We're air sealing that we never did before.
Yeah.
So our loads are going way, way down, and you can't really tell without doing a full load calculation.
Sure.
But if you take me back to 1990s, 80s, 70s, yeah, I know what size system that house needs. It's just using pretty much rough rules of thumb. So you can look at that mini split and say, oh, you got a 1-ton mini split here for this 500 square foot room. This is going to be way oversized. You're going to have humidity control problems there.
Okay, I know we need to wrap the show up, but I have one more question for Mark. Do we have time for me to ask it?
We do, and then I have one more when you're done, Tess.
Okay, we might go a little long this time. Mark, okay, thank you for coming on our show, and thank you for entertaining all of our questions. My last question is on houses that are concrete block, and let's just say they've got stucco on the exterior. You've got a hot, humid climate, so predominantly you're cooling. So as we've already mentioned, that kind of flow of heat and moisture and air is moving from the outside to the inside. The warm air is being pulled in. Any moisture that's in the stucco from rain, all the rain you guys get, just the humid air, does that work its way through the stucco into the concrete block? And does it ever create problems on the inside of the walls in the houses that you see down there in Florida? Because you just use basic sheetrock, and I think, don't you just attach that to furring strips against the block, and maybe you've got some fiberglass back there too? Is that a moldy mess?
That's an interesting question. So first of all, the heat flows from downhill. Water vapor flows downhill. So hot and humid outside, that water vapor is constantly flowing through that block wall where it's removed by the air conditioning system. If you interfere with that process, then you're going to get that water vapor condensing somewhere, either inside the wall or the really big no-no here is putting a vinyl wallpaper on an exterior wall. That's guaranteed to grow mold underneath that vinyl wallpaper because it's a vapor barrier. So you're stopping the vapor there, it condenses. Same thing if you put a big glass mirror on an exterior wall, you're pretty much going to get mold growing behind that glass mirror unless there's good air circulation behind it. So, and then water that leaks in, even if they're cracked, the block just sucks it up like a giant sponge. And unless it gets saturated, which rarely happens, it just holds it and it dries out to the interior. So it's really pretty trouble-free.
It sounds like you want your walls breathe on both sides, obviously. You don't want that moisture to get trapped. Putting vinyl wallpaper, huge no-no. But does that moisture ever create problems on the back of the sheetrock ever? I mean, when you all these houses that you used to flip before you were a home inspector, and would you open things up and find a bunch of mold behind the sheetrock between the concrete block and the
sheetrock's vapor permeable.
Yeah.
Those water vapor molecules will pass right through the sheetrock. If you put something in there that restricts it, like we don't use vapor retarders here on insulation like you do. We just use unfaced bats or use fiberglass. In those walls, they typically use an insulation that's called bifoil that goes between the furring strips between the block and the drywall, and it's a foil-based paper product. It's got little holes punched in it to allow vapor to pass through it. I have seen some mold issues with some of that sometimes, but generally that doesn't seem to be a problem. And if you put a foil-based foam board on the inside of the block, which some people do, then you can get some problems.
Okay. Okay.
Interesting. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for answering my question, because I've been thinking about that for a long time. That I would just think that the stucco on the concrete block would just be a giant sponge, and you want that.
Good. A sponge is good. What you
as
don't
long as
want
it can dry out, right? As long as it can dry out, and you don't.
You have a giant drying machine inside your house. It's called an air conditioner. So,
as long as you don't have a vapor barrier or vapor retarder in the wall, like you said, or a foil-based insulation or something else going on behind there. Yeah, that's restricting the drying. Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay. No, mine has nothing to do with building science or home inspections, really. It's more you kind of my ears perked up when you said you spent 15 years on the ASHI standards committee. And if you don't want to answer this question, we can just end the show. But
I'll answer it.
Okay. Well,
I already know what the question is.
All right. Okay, good. Well, what do you think about the new proposed standards?
I am not at all in favor of them. Just two things, and there are many others, like the term material defects. The average person doesn't know what that even means. And I'm completely opposed to sticking words in there that people don't really understand. One of the things that we always did was try and simplify the language to the point that the consumer could understand it. The second thing I don't like is adding a whole bunch of individual components that need to be inspected, like the whole section on decks. Well, that's already there because we're required to inspect structural components.
Yeah.
And, those structural components of the deck are structural components, whether they're on a deck or they're in your attic or in your basement, wherever, they're all structural components. So the problem with adding specific things like that is that then newer inspectors especially, they tend to focus only on those specific things, and they think that other things don't matter because they're not listed individually. When the case, often that's not the case. Which is, and a good example of that is the 4-point insurance form that has a bunch of defects listed on it. It also says you're required to report all defects. But a lot of people looking at it to say, well, the form only lists these things, so these are the only things that I have to report.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did when we were doing some revisions was we took some specific things out of the standards that were in there, like a specific requirement to inspect aluminum wiring. We took that out. we took out testing garage door reversing, which was in there at one point. You're required to do that, but that's part of inspecting the garage door and the operation of it. You're required to, determine whether there's aluminum wiring and report that if that's a defect. But when you put those specific things in there, then you put the focus on those things to the detriment of the other things that you don't put in there.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and then where do you stop at that point?
Right.
It's just
there's no way.
You can never. No. So that's why we kind of made things a little bit more general than they were, because that's actually more inclusive than listing a whole bunch of individual things.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to list everything, and then something new comes along and it's not listed. Well, then what does that mean?
Yeah.
So is there any saving the existing proposed standard, or do we need to go back to the drawing board and start over?
I don't think there's any way that the members are going to vote that through.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not.
I'm not either. That's my opinion, and from the comments that I've seen about it, there aren't a lot of people that seem to be really happy about that.
Okay.
And I think that's understood, especially if you consider the fact that we've gone through 2 separate comment periods now, because I think the first comment period was so negative. So there are people that kind of understand that, I think. Not knowing anything about it, I don't know anything more than any other member does, because once you become a past president, you're a has-been, and nobody tells you anything. So.
For anybody that's listening, that's a home inspector, maybe he's a member of ASHI, this is juicy gossip that we're talking about right now. But for anybody that's listening and has no clue, Reuben, can you give just a quick 30,000 foot view recap on what's happening right now, what you're talking about? The ASHI standards of practice is up for renewal, and there's been a board of people that have been trying to figure out ways to update it and update language, right? And so they came up with a new standards of practice, which is a big deal for our industry, and didn't go so well. It sounds like
it is not going well at all.
Not going well. Okay, so that did not pass, and it looks like it probably won't pass.
It didn't.
What you're saying.
It didn't even get put up for vote. That's where
didn't even get put up for vote.
Yeah, it got put up for comment. And actually, it got put up for comment, and there were a lot of comments. It got put up for comments again. There were a lot more comments, and they said, we're going back. They're not going to put it up for vote. There's going to be a third comment period at least. And yeah, I don't know.
So it's been through 3 rounds of revisions.
We're on our 3rd round. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Who knows?
All right. Is there anything for members of ASHI that they should be aware of? Is there an upcoming meeting, or is there a date for vote or anything? No, just
there's no dates on the calendar right now.
Okay.
Stay tuned. But
stay tuned.
Mark being on that for 15 years, I had to ask him about that. I know it doesn't apply to a lot of our listenership, but had to ask. So thank you for being candid, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate your honesty and your insights on that. And I think that's how, we were talking about earlier with the training stuff. It's like there's just so much you have to know as a home inspector. If we were going to try and put a checklist together for all the potential defects out of just the things that we look at, the report would be ridiculous. The reader would lose what's really important. And that's why we're there. We're there to find these bigger problems and also note the smaller ones. But
that's one of the reasons that I never really liked checklist reports or most computer generated reports, is because they gave you a list of 15, 115, whatever things. So that's all the inspector focuses on, because that's the only thing that's easy to get into the report, especially if you're doing a report on your phone. So those type of reporting systems are really kind of limiting in a subtle way. Where I'd rather see you as an inspector go out with nothing and tell me what the defects are, rather than check things off, because you're just focused on those things you got to check off, and it's too hard to get other information into your report. So you don't do it. You don't put it in. So.
Sure.
Full circle, I think, with the training for new home inspectors, anyone that's, newer to this industry, it is so important to be able to take a step back when you're inspecting a house and think about the big picture. Like, what's really going on here? When was the house built? What types of materials are there? And how you were giving us a 30,000-foot view of all the problems with these different vintage homes, different age homes. It's taking a step back and really trying to focus on those areas that are going to fail first or be the bigger problems. And you could fill in the blanks with all the other little things and all the little doors that, don't close all the way, and the door stops that are missing, and the scuffs on the wall if you want to. But what really matters is these bigger things that we're talking about today. And so to not lose sight on that, and hopefully our SOP won't lose sight on that either.
Amen.
Well, one of the things I enjoyed teaching is, process of inspection. And we could do a whole nother podcast on that, is how you focus on certain things, pay more attention to this thing and less attention to this thing, because the first thing is much more likely to be problematic than the second thing. And you got to give unequal attention, let's say, to certain aspects of the house based on how old the house is, what the problems are likely to be.
Yes, totally agree. Well, that might be a fun follow-up, Mark. We might have to get you on to come back and talk about that.
Sure, love to.
Yeah. We'll try to keep it under an hour next time. I know we kept you over today, but I appreciate your time. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they reach you, Mark?
My website is besttampainspector.com.
Okay, besttampainspector.com.
That's an easy one to remember. besttampainspector.com. I like that.
Right. Love it. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. And for the listeners, if you got any thoughts for me or Tessa, feel free to email us. We are at podcast@structuretech.com, and we will catch you next week. Have a good one. Take care.
So long.